Great. You're well qualified to discuss this.
Oh
So
yeah.
thank you for taking it. So this is really more of, I get more clarification from my editor. This is really more of a science piece, focused on the substance in our wine and the effect on our bodies. Um, and so I really wanted to talk to you. I mentioned to you that I was looking at the FDA. I guess they allow winemakers to add lots of different ingredients.
Yeah, I want to go
And
over all of them.
okay,
And I would challenge the notion that they're ingredients.
okay,
Because that's kind of the whole idea is that unlike any other beverage or food, wine isn't supposed to have any ingredients.
oh, okay.
Um, and you know, there are arguable exceptions, and we'll go over them all. But I do want to say that I think uh, there are political tactics in play that I don't have very much respect for in the so-called
Okay.
natural wine movement. I think I think they've got a political agenda and they don't play fair, and they largely don't know what they're talking about.
I don't even know what that is, and I wanted to ask you about that. So,
Well, there's this woman named Alice Firing who lives in Brooklyn who started rabble rousing around 2000. And she got a hold of me in 2000 and interviewed me. And she said, I don't really know anything about wine, but the New York Times wants me to write a piece entitled "Wine is Made in the Winery, Not in the Vineyard." And I said,
hmm.
"Well, I certainly don't agree with that." And she was going to spend like a half an hour with me and do a kind of a hatchet piece on wine technology. And she ended up spending about 3 or 4 days with me.
Wow.
And, you know, I explained a whole lot of what we do and why we do it. Uh, and then she went off and wrote the hatchet piece called "Wine is Made in the Winery, Not
Oh
in
my.
Wine is Made in the Lab, Not in the Vineyard."
Oh, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
that was
okay.
the piece, and all she had done in those 3 or 4 days was to just pick little snippets that she could misquote.
Mhm. Wow.
So anyway, there is this thing called the natural wine movement, and nobody seems to know what it is. There's a couple of chapters in my book about it, and it really has no definition. And the people that are in it, I identify 8 different constituencies: environmentalists, health
Hmm.
conscious, people that are just conservative and they want to do things the old way. And I have a table of about 50 issues on which all these people disagree.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. French oak barrels take about it takes about 200 years to get a barrel to to be ready, get a tree to be ready to make into a French oak barrel. These trees were planted by Napoleon to make a navy out
Hmm.
of. And when you cut a stave out for a barrel, you know, it's a piece of fine oak furniture. It doesn't have a nail in it. Uh, and they're fit together, but we have to throw away about 75% of the wood when we do that. And we use the barrels for flavoring. And then after one use, many wineries will cut them up for firewood. And I think
Hmm.
that's
Wow.
atrocious. And I also think that we shouldn't throw away the 75% of the good wood that can't be
Hmm.
used to make a piece of fine oak furniture. So there's several wineries now that take those little pieces that don't fit and turn them into chips and other kinds of what they call oak alternatives. And that's what I use for flavor. They toast them like coffee beans. You know, you got different kinds of roast temperatures, and I think that's a really good idea. But it's not traditional.
Uh-huh.
The other thing about them is oak barrels, when they leak, they get patched with flour. So
Okay.
so the health conscious might rather use chips, which don't leak because they're just chips. Uh,
Mhm.
so you have a conflict there between the traditionalists and the health conscious and the environmentalists being on different sides of that issue.
Okay.
And there's about 50 issues where that's the case. So
Oh, wow.
so there really is no natural wine movement, but uh, my definition of the natural wine movement is it's whatever Alice Firing says it is.
So she's decided to lead this
Yeah,
then, or
yeah, yeah. She's written a bunch of books, and uh,
okay.
I'm going to reach for my
Yeah,
coffee.
sure.
Uh, so anyway, that's a little background for you because, uh, and well, there's politics in play. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Okay. And so tell me about, you said you want to talk about that. So I wanted to learn about these additives. I understand they have been used in wines like since the beginning of time.
Well,
I
some of
just
them.
wanted you, so if you could just explain to me like what are the most, well, maybe what the earliest additives that were used and why are additives added to wine? What does it do to the wine?
Okay,
And if
great.
there's
Well,
a
and
specific
you
type
had sent me the Federal Register list of approved
yes.
additives, so we'll go over that. How's that sound?
Okay. Great. Great.
Uh,
Perfect.
I want to start by saying that all wine is highly manipulative.
Okay.
Those are not grapes in the glass. So there's a lot that has to be done, um, for any winery. But no wine is as manipulated as any beer or whiskey, and nobody's attacking brewing as unnatural, although it certainly is. Uh, so I think the concern about additives has a right place,
Hmm.
and winemakers are there too. In the natural wine movement, I think many of the people that are looking for natural wines, it's a big and expanding category now, even though nobody knows what it is. Um, and because wine has a sacred aspect to it that we all want to respect, we want it to be the one thing that we haven't been fooling with. It's just,
Hmm.
you know, and everybody's concerned about the things we put in our bodies, whether it's sexual or food or beverage, we want to know what's going on.
Sure.
Um, so so I mean, it's a good conversation to have, and I appreciate your making an effort to clarify it.
Sure.
Okay, now in that context, let me just say that there's really three wine industries, and two of them don't really count in this conversation. Um,
Okay.
the vast majority of wine customers just want to go down to the store, get a $15 or $20 bottle of wine as a pleasant buzz.
Right.
And they really don't respect wine's sacred nature. They don't even know what it is. They think Lucy stomps the grapes and then you put vodka in it and that's wine. I'm
Okay.
telling you, I teach a class for bartenders and waitresses and 22-year-old uh, college kids, and that's what they think. It's amazing. They have no idea of fermentation or any of that stuff. So, um, and that segment of the market, although it's the largest, is slowly dying
Hmm.
because of cannabis and other craft beverages that are more fun and more
Yeah.
interesting.
Sure.
And one thing about wine is it's a lousy thirst quencher.
Yeah.
That's kind of why it's a beverage of moderation. You're
Ah.
just not slamming down Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and Thomas Jefferson said, "No nation is drunken where wine is cheap," and I think that's why. Okay, so there's
Interesting.
this nationally distributed commercial brands that may use, let's call them correctives, but what they're
Hmm.
trying to do is deliver um, expected wine, just
Okay.
like Budweiser's trying to give you the same beer every time. And
Okay.
there's only on the grocery shelf. Of course, you guys don't have. I'm talking about the other states, not New York. Uh,
Not in New York. Actually, I'm in Michigan. I'm a
oh, there you
fermenter.
go. Okay, so whatever's on the grocery shelf is there's only about 12 or maybe 16 standard offerings. The buttery
Okay.
Chardonnay, the soft Merlot, the sweet white Zinfandel. There's just about a dozen. And
Okay.
and the offerings on the shelf pretty much are trying to all taste the same.
Okay.
And there are 12,000 wineries in the United States, and only 65 of them participate in that game, but they're all like over a million cases.
Wow.
The other 12,000, the average is 2,000 cases. So there are these little bitty mom and pops all over the country, most of which have no distribution except through their tasting room. And I call it the invisible rainbow, the secret American wine revolution that nobody knows about because you can't they don't have any distributors in a lot of the state laws. This is unconstitutional, by the way, but a lot of the state laws, including Michigan, uh, make it illegal for a restaurant or a wine shop to buy wine except through a distributor.
Oh, interesting.
That's a violation of the Commerce Clause, uh, and the Supreme Court has ruled on this twice. But people are doing it anyway, and
Mm.
guess who's bribing the state legislatures?
I don't know.
It's the distributors. So there's a big
Yeah.
battle going on right now. Anyway, that's about the this one big nationally distributed brand. Like those guys know so little about wine that they don't really care what's in it. Then you have even more the what I call the silly wines. These are chocolate Cabernet and wine coolers, and uh,
Okay. Yeah.
legally they're known as formula wines,
Okay.
uh, and they are allowed to use flavorings.
Okay.
Um, the term "womp" is often appears on on these bottles, and it stands for with other natural flavors.
Okay.
Those people don't care about what's in it either.
Yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah, all right. So let's forget about all those people and let's talk
Okay.
about the serious wine being made by small wineries doing the minimum in distinctive wines of place and novel varieties and blends.
Okay.
There's a huge expansion right now in new varieties that are not Vitis vinifera that has opened up the whole Midwest where you can't grow vinifera. Even a lot of Michigan, you got to be near water to grow Riesling or like up in Traverse City, they've got a lot of that stuff. But if you get into the interior of Michigan, you've got to grow these new cold tolerant varieties. And so anyway, there's all kinds of really interesting stuff happening, and the rules that these people have to abide by are in the list that we're about to talk about.
Okay. Great.
Uh, Now, the guiding principle. This is quoting from the CRF. Materials used in process of filtering, clarifying, or purifying wine may remove cloudiness, precipitation, and undesirable odors and flavors. This is remove, not add. But the
Mm,
addition of any substance foreign to wine that changes the character of the wine, uh, or the abstraction of ingredients so as to change the character of the wine, if not consistent with good commercial practice, is not permitted on bonded winery premises. Okay, so fundamentally, there aren't any additives, and then we
okay.
then we have this good long list of approved additives. So we're working from this concept of preserving vinous character. So the stuff's still got to taste like wine.
Sure.
Okay, now that first part of the sentence is about fining agents. So these are a lot of substances that will throw into the wine tank, but they're not additives because they don't end up in the final wine.
Oh, okay.
So there's a good long list of those: gum arabic, carbon. Uh, Carbons adsorb off flavors. You know, if your wine smells like peanut butter, you go looking for the right carbon that'll make that go away without harming
Okay.
the wine.
And did you say it's fining, FINING agents?
Yeah, fining. Yeah, fining.
Okay. And they're what did they use for then? They're just to get rid of undesirable flavors or
Well, let's go down
um,
the list. Uh, like I said, carbons are used for removing off aromas. There's actually deodorizing carbons and decolorizing carbons, and the decolorizing carbons are used to remove browning.
okay.
Like if the wine gets oxidized, you may be able to save it by pulling out the
Okay.
brown. Then
Okay.
we have several proteins. Um, Traditionally, there were four: gelatin, which these are all animal products. So you have
Okay.
gelatin is from beef tendon. Uh, Egg albumin is from egg whites.
Okay.
Um, Casein is from milk. And this is a really weird one. It's called isinglass. ISINGLASS. And
Okay.
it's made from the swim bladders of sturgeons.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah, here's how I think that happened. Before we had plastics, they used to use the swim bladders as they get a brass ring and they'd stretch the swim bladder around the brass ring to make a portal on a ship.
Oh.
Okay, so Bordeaux is a maritime province, and there must have been some French winemaker that saw these portholes and said, "Ah, I shall put one in my tank, and
Oh
I
wow.
will invent the sight glass, so I can see inside
Okay.
my wine."
Oh wow.
So he put
Okay.
it in there, and it immediately turned black.
Oh wow.
So he said, "Well, I think I invent the fining agent." And it has an affinity for tannin. So if the wine has harsh tannin, I'm talking about like the mouth feel of an unripe banana.
Okay.
Well, sometimes wine can get that way. Wines have a lot of tannins,
Okay.
and a lot of what good winemaking is about is to sort of romance the tannins so that they're, well, it's really like what the Aztecs taught the Spanish taught the Belgians about how to make chocolate. You
Mm-hmm.
start with cocoa powder, which is the harshest thing you can put in your mouth, and then you transform it. You know that chocolate waterfall in Willy Wonka? They really have those. That's how you make.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you convert chocolate using oxygen and convert cocoa into chocolate. It's
Wow.
called conching, and we have our own equivalent of that called micro oxygenation, where we're using oxygen kind of like the wire whisk to make a tannin souffle that's full and light. Okay, so you had those four. Now a lot of people don't like this. Animal rights activists and stuff, and so there's been a lot of research in the last 10 years about you finding vegetable uh, proteins that can be used as fighting agents.
Okay.
And the big ones are from English pea and potato. But there's a lot of research on this, and they actually work better than the old animal fighting agents. So that's all I ever use if I find it all. But when I find that when I play with oxygen, like I explained, that I don't need to use fighting agents.
So you don't need them at all.
I don't need them at all.
Okay. And so when you said that there's the you talked about the ones from the four animal products, so they all serve the same purpose to um
Well, it's a black
like
art. Some of them, uh, you just have to try. You have to do trials and find out
okay.
which one is the right one that does the improvement you're looking for and doesn't strip flavor. So you
Okay.
tried.
But they're main
Mainly, you're taking out tannins.
okay. And you want to do that because that has makes it less bitter tasting or removes odor or
Strictly
what's the
speaking, um, tannins can have a bitterness to them, but mostly you're trying to take out astringency, which is not a taste. Bitterness is a taste.
okay.
Astringency is a harshness, sort of turns the
Okay.
inside of your mouth into sandpaper.
Okay.
And we call that astringency.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to bitterness and some of the other, uh, they're see tannins are big. They're long chain polyphenols. If you have just a monomer, you want to take that out. They don't work so well. But what does work well is a plastic. It's a ground up plastic similar to nylon, and it's called PVPP,
Okay.
which stands for uh, polyvinyl polypyrrolidone. But you probably don't care about that. It's made by
Yeah. Yeah.
GAF Corporation,
Okay.
and most winemakers use a little bit in white wines so they don't turn pink.
Okay.
All right, now bentonite.
How do you spell that? You said B
Bentonite.
right. So that's another additive.
It's a clay, and it's mined near Fort Benton, Wyoming. So
Okay.
it's sometimes called Wyoming clay.
Okay.
And it's used for removing protein from white wine.
Okay. And why do you want to do that?
Because if you don't, the wine will turn cloudy
Okay.
and people won't buy it.
Okay.
So oh, it's almost universal that you have to do some trials to figure out how much protein you have and use this dirt to to adsorb the proteins that are unstable.
Okay. And how is protein created in the wine? Is that like through the grape process, or how does the protein occur? The protein
Yeah,
content.
it's a great protein.
Okay.
and it's unstable in alcoholic solution, and that precipitation is sped along, accelerated by heat.
Okay.
So when you get out of that 55-degree cellar and you put it on the grocer's uh, shelf at 70, 75 degrees, then it will precipitate this cloudiness and people won't buy it.
I see. Okay.
So,
Okay.
I mean, natural wine or whatever, everybody uses bentonite. And
Okay.
it's not an additive because it doesn't remain in the wine.
Okay. So when you say it doesn't remain in the wine, where does it go, and how does it get?
It
How
precipitates
does it?
out and you filter it. All of these compounds are that way.
Oh, okay. So every single type of listed ingredient that's on that FDA notice, they don't remain in
I
the
didn't
wine.
say that.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just talking about finding agents now,
Got it.
which are
Okay.
not
All right.
additives, but
Okay.
they're on that list anyway. So, and the
Oh, okay.
and there's one
Okay.
more, which is called chitosan.
How do you spell that?
Chitosans.
Okay.
Chitin, you know that animal bones are they're the structural elements uh, of animals' skeletons, and they have calcium in them, right?
Okay.
Uh, fish and fungi and, well, like the shells of lobsters, for example, that
Mhm.
carapace, those are all made out of uh, chitin.
Oh, okay.
So you could, for example, if you wanted to, you could very finely chop up a mushroom. It's all chitin, and you
Okay.
could use that. So a bunch of outfits have come in using. They actually farm it from a mold called Aspergillus niger, and
Okay.
they they grind it up into particles that are about the size of a yeast cell,
Okay.
and they have a rough surface. So they disrupt the cell membranes of yeast and bacteria. So
Okay.
if we have a wine that has a lot of vinegar bacteria in it and we don't want it to spoil, we can throw some chitin in there and it will precipitate out the dead bacteria.
Okay.
And again, this is this gets filtered out, so it's not a
Okay.
residue
Okay.
in the
Okay.
wine.
So
Okay.
the ones you mentioned before also were all the other ones you mentioned were also finding agents, right? The
Everything I've talked about so far is a finding agent.
so far as the finding agent. Got it. Okay, great. Okay, and these are all things that are added to wine, but they precipitate out and they're filtered out and they don't stay in the wine.
Correct.
Okay.
So let me read that first sentence in the standard wine guiding principle. Materials used in the process of filtering, clarifying, or purifying wine may remove cloudiness, precipitation, and undesirable odors and flavors. Those are
Got
finding
it.
agents.
Okay.
Now we talk
Got it.
about the addition of any substance foreign to wine. So here's the list. The first thing is water. There are 3 reasons to add water to wine or grape juice. The first one is called amelioration, and what it does is uh, we don't do this in California. I think it's against the law, but in almost every other state, it's colder, and so they end up with wines that have too much acid.
Okay.
And the easy way to reduce the acidity is just to add water. You can add it up to 35%, I think.
Okay.
And the whole point is just to make the wine less acidic.
Okay.
The second
And
reason,
does a more acidic wine taste less appealing? What's the problem of having an acidic
well, one
wine?
of the big challenges of winemaking is to get the wine to have the correct acidity so that it's
Okay.
balanced.
Okay.
Uh, like the role of CO2 and also phosphoric acid in Coca Cola is there so that it doesn't taste cloying because it has a lot of sugar.
Okay.
So Coca Cola and all the other soda pops are balancing the acidity so they end up with something refreshing but not hard to drink.
Okay.
So um, the ideal for white wines is somewhere around 7 grams per liter, and some of these wines might come in with 10, and they're just too tart. Um,
Okay.
so,
Okay.
so the law allows water for amelioration quite a bit, uh, but I think it has to be to the juice. I don't think you can add it to wine that way, but I'm not sure about that. The second reason is all these fining agents have to be set up in what we call slurries. So, like bentonite, for example, it's clay, so it's not going to disperse in the wine. You have to hydrate it with water.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and the law restricts the amount of water you can use for slurries to 1% of the volume of the wine. The third reason, and this is something we do in California a lot, and it's a really good idea. Our, our problem in California, unlike Michigan, is that our air is too dry.
Okay.
You may not like the humidity you get in the summer in Michigan, but that's why you make good
Yeah.
wine.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We don't have that, and so water evaporates from the grapes and they don't get ripe until they have very high sugars.
Okay.
And then if you make the wine that way, it's hot and bitter.
Mm.
So one of the ways to deal with that is to put the water back.
So you add that into
At the crusher.
what? Okay.
And what's funny is that you would think that would dilute the wine,
Hmm.
but it doesn't. It's just the opposite.
Oh,
Because the color and a lot of the flavor components aren't soluble in high alcohol. They have to form together into little beads, little tiny, they're called copigmentation colloids. And they won't form at high alcohol.
okay.
So when you dilute so that you end up with, let's say, 13.5% alcohol instead of 16, the wines have more color, more flavor, more richness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, a lot of winemakers don't know this, but I
That's
keep trying to tell
interesting.
them. And
That's really interesting.
yeah, so that can be, if your grapes come in at, let's say, 29% sugar, which sometimes they do, you'll be adding 25% water to that stuff.
Oh, wow.
And this is kind of a problem between growers. The winemaker says, okay, I don't want to pick it until it's 29% sugar. Well, where's all that water that's evaporating belongs to the grower. So
Mm.
now he only gets 3 tons per acre instead of 4 tons per acre, and it's a way of stealing from the grower.
Interesting. Okay. Right. So that's water, and
Yeah,
then
that's
there
water.
are
Okay. Then the next one is brandy.
brandy, like not like brandy, like the liquor brandy.
Yeah, grape
Oh, okay.
grape spirits.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. What was the average alcohol of a California wine in 1960?
I have no idea.
Take a wild guess.
I mean, I don't know, 10%. I have no idea. Like I'm just shooting in the dark.
18.5%.
Wow.
That's because we weren't making any table wine at all. 95% of the wine California was making in 1960 was port and sherry.
Oh, really?
So
Wow.
every winery had a still, and you're allowed to add brandy to make port and sherry.
Hmm. Okay. That's if you want the wine to be port and sherry instead of just table wine. That's to make the port and sherry instead of having
Yeah,
table wine,
dessert
is
wine.
what you're saying.
That's right.
Dessert wine. Got it. Okay.
And you can add
Perfect.
it. It doesn't affect the varietal percentages. Uh, it's kind of a non-event in terms of compliance.
Okay. Great. Okay.
All right, now the third thing is the flavors that come from oak barrels.
Okay.
We just already talked about this. Uh, barrels, it used to be in the 19th century that barrels were kind of the Rubbermaid of
Really?
you if you wanted to ship crackers or nails or you did it in a barrel.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was a transport container,
Okay.
and nobody really was talking about flavor. But when you make a barrel, you build a fire inside the barrel to give enough heat that you can bend the staves in and make this watertight container. And you
Okay.
hammer hoops down around it, and it's watertight.
Okay.
But in the last 50 years, there's been more and more attention paid to the precise flavors that you get. So, for example, vanilla, which people love,
Hmm.
is a product of toasting oak.
Hmm. Okay.
The fire does it. The fire also makes something called eugenol, which is a clove flavor, and guaiacol, which is kind of a sweet char, um,
Okay.
and something called whiskey lactone. It's kind of coconut. There's a big long list of these.
Okay.
And so in the last 50 years, we've been getting really smart about exactly what we want, which cooper and what degree of toasting, temperature, humidity, all that stuff in order to
Okay.
make the style of wine that we want to make. And this goes back a good 400 years to Burgundy and Bordeaux. And their connections to French coopers, I think, have a lot to do with why they've made such great wines for so long.
Connections to French. What did you say? French.
Coopers.
Oh, okay.
A cooper is a guy who makes barrels.
Oh, okay. Great.
Sorry.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
All right, so that has been the situation until about 20 years ago when my hero, Patrick Ducournau, French guy, started talking about what a shame it was that people were throwing these barrels away. And
Hmm.
he started making chips. He's the guy who invented the oxygen technique I talked about, but he also
Okay.
started making chips, and they're really good chips. So I can get exactly the flavor profile that I want
Okay.
uh, from chips, and then my barrels I hope my barrels outlive me. I don't have
Oh,
any barrels that are less than 20 years old because I don't want the unpredictable extraction from barrels. I just want, the slow oxidation that happens to allow the wine to mature in barrels. And if I want to add flavor, I'll do it with chips.
and so those are like literal chips that you just put in the liquid in the beverage. I
Yep.
mean, in the
Yeah, and there's
and
all
they have
kinds of there's balls and there's staves and there's javelins and all all kinds of
okay. And they all come. They all are. The point of them is they have a flavor of their own that permeates the wine, so
yeah, they
it's more
roast them
flavorful.
in drums like coffee beans.
Okay.
And you know how when you go to Starbucks, they'll have the light roast and the heavy roast and the medium roast. It's the same deal.
Okay. And so you just and they do they remain in? They don't remain
No,
in the wine then, right?
well, but the
Okay.
flavor that comes out of them remains in the wine.
Got it.
I mean, you're not
Okay.
going to find a little piece of wood in your bottle.
Right. Right. That's right. That's what I was asking. And that's a permitted ingredient as well, or
Yes.
permitted. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, flavor from be it from barrels or oak alternatives has always been this is covered under the good commercial practice phrase there.
Okay.
And and I will say that some people just like vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like garlic. Some people just want all the garlic they can get on a pizza.
Mm-hmm.
But in my view, good cooking involves using garlic in a subliminal way so that it brings out the flavor of everything else.
Okay.
And that's how I feel about oak alternatives. I don't want you to be able to taste the oak.
Okay.
Uh, my French tutors taught me that uh, when a woman really knows how to use cosmetics, you can't tell she's wearing any.
Mhm.
So it's
And so is that what when people refer to something that's oak has an oaky taste? Is that what they're
uh
referring
huh.
to? Oh, okay. So, but you wouldn't want it to be an oaky taste. You're saying, right? You just want it to.
Well, I think novice wine drinkers really like the taste of oak. I actually, when I was, this is going back to 1972, uh, I tasted a wine called Clerc Mignon, which is a fifth growth Bordeaux owned by the Rothschilds.
Mm,
And it blew my mind. It was so good.
mm,
So I bought, I went, wow, a peak experience in a bottle. I can get behind that.
mhm,
So I bought two cases.
uh-huh.
By the end of the 24th bottle, I realized that the only thing this wine had going for it was lots of vanilla.
Oh, okay.
And by the end of that time, I had gotten a little more sophisticated in my taste and I couldn't stand it.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
Yeah, so my wines are not oaky. They
Okay.
spend many years in very old barrels,
Okay.
but that doesn't make them oaky. It
Okay.
just makes these tertiary flavors evolve. And then if I use oak at all, it's in that way of cosmetics that you can't tell they're there.
Okay. Got it.
Because to me, the real goal, and I think most winemakers feel this way, except for the industrial ones,
Mhm.
like you may have seen the Chardonnay out there called its actual name is butter.
Oh, yeah, I have seen it. Yep.
That comes from a bacteria that makes a compound called diacetyl. It's what they put on popcorn in movie theaters.
Oh, wow.
So those people don't want to taste Chardonnay. Chardonnay has a wonderful golden delicious apple character. They don't want
Uh-huh.
to taste that. They want to taste butter. and
Oh,
maybe
interesting.
toast. They want their Chardonnay to taste like breakfast.
Okay.
And I hate that kind of stuff. But I
Yeah.
don't think that it's wrong that they're using these techniques to make a style that people like.
Mhm.
But for my palate, it's just bad cooking.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So there's kind of a distinction. This is a place where your consumers can get involved.
Hmm.
So for example, there's a thing called the ABC Club, anything but Chardonnay. And
Okay.
those are consumers that just hate all that toast and butter.
Ah, okay.
And I actually make a Chardonnay that doesn't have toast and butter for those people. This is the ABC
Oh,
Chardonnay.
okay. That's wild. So that's another one that is, again, filtered out, or it doesn't
The
remain in the
flavors
wine. You put it in,
remain.
add flavor,
There's
flavors remain.
there's
Okay.
no question that oak barrels and alternatives, and there's some other woods like cherry wood. We call them aromatic woods. That we also
Okay.
use chips and barrels from those woods. Acacia is another one. Uh, I don't think anybody's freaking out that we're putting wine in barrels.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, a lot of them freak out if we don't.
Mm.
So yeah, you could say that's an additive.
Hmm.
Okay, so then uh,
Hmm.
the next category on the list is tannins.
Okay.
So we can add tannins uh, if the wine doesn't have enough tannin. We can add some, and there's a whole bunch of other
Okay.
reasons. If the grapes come in moldy, they'll have an oxidative enzyme in them called lacase, and we can throw tannin in the juice that will attach to the lacase and deactivate it. So there's a bunch of reasons to add tannins to wine.
Okay.
However, now here's one of those dirty little secrets you were looking for. Uh,
Mhm.
if you want to add, uh, well, tannins are a phenolic compound. It's just a class of compounds. Almost everything I've talked about, vanilla and eugenol, the clove flavor, and guaiacol, they're all phenolics. They have a
Okay.
specific little structure to them. And if you want to add phenolics that are really flavors, they get smuggled in under the under the fictitious name of finishing tannins.
Okay.
And so, uh, I mean, I think that's okay. It is kind of a stealth move to get on around the regulations. Um, but if those materials are used with skill, so let's
Hmm.
say, for example, you have a smoke tainted wine,
Hmm.
then the smokiness robs the fruit of the wine and makes it harsh. And so you might be able to come up with a finishing tannin that would make the wine softer and and give it more fruity aroma,
Okay.
so that it could be a commercial wine.
Okay.
So I don't think that's, personally, I more power to them, but
Hmm.
it all comes down to whether it's good cooking or not.
Okay.
Excessive use of these finishing tannins makes wines that are just silly, and
Okay.
I don't want to drink them.
Okay.
It's not because it's an evil practice. It's because the winemaker's a dunce.
Okay. All right.
Okay, now SO2. I'm sure you've heard about that.
Uh-huh.
So Sulfur dioxide is an antimicrobial and antioxidant that is used in almost all wine.
Really? Okay.
Uh, I make sulfite free wines, but it's a real challenge. It's
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. So it's used in almost all wines, and what's the purpose of it?
antimicrobial. So, in other words, it kills like acetic acid bacteria, vinegar bacteria,
Okay.
and other bad actors.
Okay.
Uh, and it also uh, keeps the wine from browning and oxidizing. It keeps it fresh.
Okay. Okay. Great.
By the way, there are very small amounts of SO2 uh, because you can smell it.
Okay.
So you're, the standard is 25 parts per million, where
Okay.
fish and dried fruit commonly have like 40 times that amount.
Oh wow. Okay.
And the other thing you know about SO2 is it's impossible to be allergic to it.
So why? What do people say when they? What do you mean? Like people always say they are. Like
Yeah,
what
I
are they
know.
talking about?
I know. They're wrong. Because the human
Okay.
the human body produces 1,000 parts per million every day.
Mm.
That's 40 times what you'll find in a whole bottle of wine. This isn't to say you can't be allergic to wine. There's lots of things you can be allergic to. Uh, there's these compounds called biogenic amines that have lovely names. The one you've probably heard of is histamine. But
Uh-huh.
then there's putrescine and cadaverine. And
Wow.
yeah,
And so you said, but why do you make one that doesn't have it in it? But I also heard it's naturally occurring, so that it's really difficult to
that
do that.
is total horseshit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and this is coming out of UC Davis, and they should know better because uh, okay, you have these monomeric phenols and oxygen. If the wine sees any oxygen at all, like for example when you barrel it down, then the oxygen is going to react with the phenol and it's going to go off and polymerize. So it goes and gets another phenol and then it cascades, does this again and again. Every time it happens, you convert the oxygen to hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide plus SO2 is the fastest reaction known to chemistry. 10 to the minus 12 seconds per mole.
Hmm.
And so immediately, all of the 5 or 10 parts that are created by yeast goes away in the first week of the wine's life. And
Okay.
and and Roger Bolton and Andy Waterhouse at Davis have written papers about this reaction, and yet they insist that it's impossible to make a sulfite-free wine. It
Hmm.
blows my
Okay.
mind. What's the matter
Hmm.
with these guys? Don't they even read their own papers?
So you're saying you do make that sulfite
I
free wine, but you
do.
said
And it turns out that if you don't have SO2, that the wine reacts more with oxygen. It has a big, you amp up the oxygen appetite and the wine takes care of itself. So this is kind of like if you take medicine, uh, say you're taking levothyroid for your pancreas, that
mhm.
your pancreas will shut down because it doesn't need to make that stuff because you're eating it as a medicine. And SO2 it
Okay.
kind of acts like that. So if you don't have it there, then the wines will gobble up oxygen, and this will keep the vinegar bacteria uh, away because they have to have oxygen to do their thing.
Oh,
So
okay.
I aged those wines about 5 or 6 years in old barrels, and even then, they're not oxidizing but they're very what we call reduced. They're closed, and they need a lot of further aging until they really open up. But when they do, they're just great wines.
So if you think people aren't allergic to it, why do you go to the trouble of making a sulfite-free wine? Because people think they're allergic to it?
Because it's good cooking.
Okay, so why don't all your wines have no not don't have sulfates? Like why don't you do that with all of your wines?
Well, I don't think it's really always appropriate. These
Okay.
wines, they have really good structure. They can integrate the flavors. They can last a long time, and they give you a bottle bouquet that is quite profound. This is, I don't know if you've ever had a wine that you just, well, if you had had a wine like this, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. You'd be doing what I'm doing, and that's what winemakers want to do is they want to make wine that'll change your life.
Huh.
You know, it's
Yeah.
just like really good Chinese food. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? You go, oh my God, you know, some garlic black bean thing, and you go, he, this Chinese guy showed me a place in my soul that I didn't even know I had. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's why I make them. But other wines, I want to show the varietal character
Hmm.
because I make a lot of goofy wines from grapes nobody ever heard of. I make Saint Laurent, I make Norton, which is a Native American grape, uh, and I make Tempranillo and Sangiovese, and people just they want to taste the grape character and the flavor of the place,
Okay.
and so I don't really want to interfere with that with this profundity.
That makes sense. Yeah. And so others, so that was the next one, the SO2. And then are there others?
Yeah, there's another preservative called ascorbic acid, and it's a reducing agent, so it prevents browning. They use it a lot in
Okay.
Australia. It's vitamin C.
And oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So what the hell?
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay.
Now then we have yeast.
Uh-huh. And that's been used in wine since like the beginning of time, right? Or
Well, you don't get wine if you don't have yeast.
right. Okay.
So that's got to be okay.
Right, right.
Now you don't have to add it, and lately a lot of people are doing what they call uninoculated fermentations. The Australians call them feral ferments. But they just crush the grapes and then they wait around for them to ferment on their own, which is, that's,
Okay.
I mean, nobody knew what yeast was until about 1900.
Hmm.
So you've got at least 8,000 years of history where nobody knew. That's what you did. You just crushed the grapes and off they go. We've learned now the natural wine people really want you to do that
Hmm.
because they think it expresses the terroir, the character of that particular vineyard. And we've done some experiments to prove that that's not true.
Okay.
Uh, we took 6 different vineyards in Oregon and we did little mini fermentations in a lab called ETS. And then we gave some of these grapes to 6 different wineries. And then we looked using PCR. Everybody knows what PCR is now, right? Because of COVID.
Yep.
So we used that to figure out which yeasts, you know, not just the species, but the actual genetic strain, were doing these fermentations. And we found that the same grapes done in 6 different wineries had very little yeast in common. But
Okay.
when 6 different vineyards were done in the same winery, they had a lot of yeast in common. So we now
Okay.
know that it's not the vineyard that's giving us those characters, it's the winery. And
Okay.
furthermore, these were all wineries that had never bought yeast.
Mm.
But the strains that did the fermentations turned out to be commercial yeasts that had gotten into the
So you
wild.
so you could have your own. I mean, you could just let it happen, but do some people add yeast on top of that? And or does it just occur naturally?
Right. And I do that too, because what does come in from the vineyard is a whole bunch of spoilage yeast and bacteria.
Mm.
And guess what they make? Biogenic amines,
Mm.
like 10 times as much. So if you're allergic to wine, don't drink natural wine
Mm.
because it's full of these things that a lot of people are very sensitive to.
Okay.
And
Okay.
again, I don't want my wine to taste like spoilage yeast and bacteria. A lot of wineries do it because
Mhm.
they think it adds complexity. So
Hmm.
fine, we
Right.
every winemaker's got a different philosophy, and if that weren't
Sure.
true,
I'm sure.
then it'd just be like the dairy industry. We'd just be all doing the same thing. But
Of course. Right.
letting everybody do whatever it is they do, I think, is a very important part of the wine industry. And I'm kind of coming back to this whole idea. Reminds me of when Bob Dylan went electric.
Right.
Were you around for that?
I mean, I was young, but I mean,
People
I
thought
don't.
that that was the end of folk music.
Mm.
And I say that Dylan is a genius and that's what he wanted to do, and they should just let him do his thing. And
Interesting.
they did,
Yeah.
and he's released, I don't know, 25 or 50 albums that are electric since. And
Yeah.
and the music didn't die.
Right.
And that's where I think consumers should be at the end of this whole conversation is they should trust the winemaker
Hmm.
and they should buy the wines that they like. And if there's bad winemaking going on, don't buy the wines.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Rather than backseat driving around a few relatively trivial issues. But back to
Okay.
yeast, we used
Uh-huh.
we used to say back in, well, I went to UC Davis in the 80s, and Ralph Kunke was the microbiologist there, and he said that yeast, there's no difference between yeasts in terms of the flavors they impart that lasts more than a year. Because they were mostly
Okay.
producing these fruity esters, and they would break down by the time the wine got to the consumer. That is no longer true.
Okay.
And for sure, in the last 10 years, uh, well, well, let me go back to 20 years ago. And this is what drove Alice Firing crazy is you would read these catalogs and they'd say, oh, well, this will impart a strawberry aroma. And this, and she was going, wait a minute. You guys are using commercial yeasts to put flavor in the wines. And what she didn't realize, because she'd never made any wine, was that that was all lies. And everybody knew it. So you would choose a yeast because it was a low foamer, so you could barrel ferment, or you would use something that would slow down at high temperatures, so you get more time on the skins. But it was physical stuff like that, not flavors. But that's not
Got
true
it.
anymore. So, as an example, there's a yeast called Alchemy 4, and it brings out red fruity notes, and they endure.
Hmm.
So when my clients are asking me what should I do, I've got smoke taint. I'll say use Alchemy 4 because that will give you some fruit.
Hmm.
And then when we when we treat the wine to take out the smoke taints, you're going to need that extra fruitiness in there to kind of cover up whatever's left over. So again, I don't think this is evil, uh,
Mhm.
but that's just me. So
And then
it is
other
true that yeasts are being used to add flavor and texture and we have a lot of choices about what we want to use to make the kind of wine we want.
okay. And so do you add yeast on top of what already occurs naturally, or does it,
Well,
or is it just
yeah, if
some?
you're going to buy Alchemy 4, then you have to throw it in there. And,
Okay.
so there's kind of two reasons to do that. One is that you want to control the yeast uh, physical properties and flavor properties. You want your yeast to be the one that takes over, as
Oh, okay.
opposed to the microbiome in your winery that will do the fermentation. The second reason is it takes about 4 days uh, on the skins, what we call cold soak, for the yeast in the winery to take over. And so I like to inoculate right away so that I don't get all of these spoilage yeast and bacteria doing their thing.
So you add a certain amount of yeast to your product, or you?
To the juice, yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Uh,
Are there other?
oh, we're only about halfway through the list.
Oh my. Okay.
So the next one is fermentation aids, nutrients.
Okay.
So
Okay.
uh, if the must comes in with a deficiency of nitrogen, then there are a whole lot of products that you can add. They're mostly breakdown products from yeast, uh,
Okay.
and there's also an inorganic fertilizer called diammonium phosphate (DAP) that is permitted, but I don't like it.
Okay.
It's too good. It gets the fermentations roaring, um, but we want the yeast to consume all the micronutrients that are in the must. And if we give them fertilizer, they basically you give them Twinkies, they won't eat their oatmeal.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So
Okay.
again, that's a winemaker choice.
Okay.
Then we have malolactic bacteria. So grapes have sugar, but they also have malic and tartaric acids. And the butteriness of Chardonnay comes from malolactic bacteria. And they're
Okay.
so you can inoculate with them, and there's a lot of other things you do, like the temperature you hold the wine at, and whether or not you hold it on its yeast lees to encourage butteriness, or you can use a different kind of inoculum to discourage butteriness. But in any case, it's legal to add malolactic bacteria.
And what's you said that? Okay. And so again, what the point of that is to you said
Well,
that they.
red wines are going to go through malolactic no matter what you do, even if you don't inoculate. So you just inoculate so you get one with desirable characteristics.
And what's the problem with? I mean, that it's trying to address though.
Oh, well, you have this malic
Why would?
acid in there, and it's not stable.
Oh,
It's
okay.
going to go through this malolactic, it's going to be converted by bacteria from malic acid to lactic acid and bubbles. And some
Oh,
kind of stinky stuff that like kimchi. But it
okay.
goes away. That's one of the reasons you put the wine in a barrel, so it can off gas some of these weird characters.
Okay.
Uh, and so if you want to control the malolactic, then you add a desirable strain.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Okay, then
Perfect.
we have a whole list of acids that are naturally occurring in grapes,
Okay.
and you can add all of those. You can add, here's the list: tartaric, that's the one we mostly use because it's the strongest. Uh, Malic, lactic. Lactic is the acid in yogurt.
Okay.
Acetic, which is vinegar.
Okay.
Uh, why would you ever want to do that? Well, sometimes when,
Yeah.
you know, acetic acid in moderate amounts is important to, it gives a kind of a tang to the finish
Mm.
of the wine, and sometimes you don't have enough.
Mm. Okay.
And then there are two acids you can add that are not naturally present in grapes. One is citric,
Okay.
and citric is used, hardly anybody uses it anymore, but in Europe, before they had stainless steel, everything was made out of mild steel and brass, all the fittings,
Okay.
and those could form a precipitate in the wine. So citric in very small amounts uh, is a chelating agent, which means it hugs the metal ions and prevents that precipitation. But everybody uses stainless steel now, so it's really not used very much.
Okay.
And the other one is fumaric acid, and that's produced by fungi. And the only reason to ever add it, because it tastes kind of funny, is if you accidentally, like all white wines except Chardonnay, pretty much don't go through malolactic. We use SO2 to suppress it. But what if you
Hmm.
inadvertently take some of your malolactic Chardonnay and top up your tank of Riesling with it? See, that's going to ruin the wine. So
Hmm.
what you do is you put in a small amount of fumaric acid, which kills malolactic bacteria.
Okay. Great.
All right, now the next uh, the next additive is deacidifying agents, calcium carbonate and potassium bicarbonate.
Okay.
Uh, so those are mostly used in the Midwest when you have a wine that has very high acid and you just want to reduce it. But the
Okay.
other possibility in Monterey, we get wines that come in and they have high titratable acidity. That's the tart stuff, but also very high pHs. High pH not a good thing. Wines will oxidize, and so
Okay.
there's a methodology called the double salt where you can pull out the excess malic acid and move the pH down. I don't want to take you through the whole thing, but
Mm.
but sometimes you have to do that or the wine will spoil.
Got it. Okay.
Uh, so then the next one is CO2.
Mhm.
I have a whole chart. If you have red wines, should have low CO2 be,
Okay.
because the CO2 stimulates salivation, and the protein in your saliva will combine with the tannins in the red wine, and it'll taste coarse.
Huh.
So CO2 is an acid; it stimulates salivation. You want to have that pretty low. So we're talking,
Okay.
you want to have a little bit, but not very much. Uh, so that's like 400 to 500 parts per million. When we get to whites, what kind of the, I don't want to take you through the whole history of this, but Uh,
Okay.
uh, Modern white wine is nothing like the kind of wine we made for 8,000 years. And it's
Hmm.
because of Hitler. Uh, if it hadn't been for
What do you mean?
him, we never would have had the Manhattan Project and we never would have split the atom. Uh,
Huh.
One of the peacetime uses of nuclear power was to make bubble pointable sterile filters. There's a German company called Nuclear that taught us how to make wine that was sweet or
Hmm.
off dry. The first one of these was Blue Nun
Oh
in the
yeah.
mid 60s. All modern white wine is a child of Blue Nun. This guy named Peter
Really?
Sichel who figured out how to do it. So I told you the average alcohol of a California wine in 1960 was 18.5.
Hmm.
By 1970, the average alcohol was 11. And that's because we were making nothing but white table wine and it was all Blue Nun knockoffs like Winnie Gray
Oh wow.
Riesling and Gallo Chablis and
Yep, I remember it very well.
yeah, Almaden Rhine wine and Weibel Green Hungarian. It was all 11% alcohol and 2% sugar. Those wines did
Hmm.
not exist before World War II. And they
Hmm.
ushered in like the prime directive for all modern white wine is that it must be fresh.
Okay.
Didn't used to be that way. The
Hmm.
new, they call them orange wines or amber wines that are made in the ancient way, those are very profound and they age a long time and they're not supposed to be fresh. That's the way white
Hmm.
wine really was. But now, if you get yourself a, even New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is a child of Blue Nun, and it has to be fresh.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Wow.
freshness can be improved with CO2.
Oh, okay.
So if you got something like Chardonnay, it still has to be fresh, but you don't want it to be fizzy. You want it to be kind of fat. So you use about
Right.
750 parts there. If you have something like Sauvignon Blanc, you want it to have it even fresher, you'll go with 800 or 900 parts. If you have a Riesling, you might even want a little bit of a bubble there. So you might go with 1100 parts per million. White Zinfandels like 1700 parts per million. So how do we get this? We go down to the store and buy some dry ice.
Hmm.
And so that's an additive. I mean, it's still in the wine, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Of
Got it.
course, fermentation creates a lot of CO2, so we may be able to retain it, so we don't have to add any.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
now there is a compound or a series of compounds in wine called sulfides. They have nothing to do with sulfites,
Okay.
and they're stinky.
Hmm.
So H2S, hydrogen sulfide, is the rotten egg odor,
Okay.
or kind of like a Mexican fart.
Okay.
Uh, Ethyl mercaptan has a sort of a diesel or onion smell to it. Diethyl mercaptan smells like a home permanent.
Okay.
So
These are they occur in wines naturally, or you add them
yeah,
to?
yeah, they're sort of breakdown products of protein synthesis.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, we don't add them. What
Okay.
we add is copper sulfate,
Okay.
and in some cases, ascorbic acid.
Okay.
Um, I don't like this because it's an oxidizing agent. So I will treat the wines with oxygen instead. But a lot
Okay.
of winemakers don't know how to do that, and so they'll add copper. Uh, copper is poisonous, so the level you can use is very highly restricted. Half a part per million is the most, and most of the time you only need like zero point 0.1 parts per million, maybe zero point 0.2.
And that removes those
Yeah,
smells.
yeah. Go through your change at the grocery store and find uh, a a copper penny minted 1981 or previous, and
Okay.
keep it in your purse. And then if you're at a bar and somebody pours you a wine that seems kind of stinky,
Mhm.
throw the penny in there for 60 seconds.
Really, and it
Yeah,
works.
yeah, it's really cool.
Wow,
Yeah, yeah, it's a it's a good bar trick.
interesting. Okay, all right. So that's another one. What's the next one?
Okay, now here's some compounds that do not remain in the wine. One of them is called Velcorin.
What is it?
Velcorin, Velcorin.
Okay.
That's a product name. It's made by the Bayer people, the people that make Bayer aspirin,
Okay.
and it's also known as dimethyl dicarbonate or DMDC.
Okay.
You this is used in a lot of products like orange juice, a lot of fruit drinks. So you put it in the wine at bottling, and it sterilizes the wine,
Okay.
kills everything, and then
Okay.
breaks down into CO2, water, and a very small amount of methanol.
Okay.
Grapes, it adds about 10% to the natural methanol content of the wine that comes from the breakdown of pectin
Okay.
from the grapes. Uh, I don't like to use it because, as you know, I like to see this microbial development in the bottle. But a lot of California wineries, they don't want to filter, so they use this stuff instead to kill off spoilage, yeast, and bacteria. And the other, this is a very broad topic, but there are all kinds of enzymes that we use for all kinds of things. A lot of them go in at the juice stage uh, to liberate aromas. A lot of the aromatic compounds are tied to sugars, and the enzyme can break that, so we end up with more aroma. Some of them break down pectin so that there's faster extraction of color and flavor. Uh, I mean, I could take all day telling you the different uses
Sure. I'm
of
sure.
enzymes.
Got
They're
it.
pretty amazing. They're in very very small amounts, and they don't remain in the wine.
Got it. Okay. Are there any others, or those would you
Well,
say are the
we're down
main
to the
ones?
last group, and
Okay.
so these are stabilizers. One of them is called sorbic acid.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
I hate sorbic acid. It
Okay.
has a
What's
it
it?
makes the wine smell like magnolia blossom. And I really hate it in red wine because malolactic bacteria will convert it into something called geranium tone, like the smell you have on your hands when you garden. It's
Okay.
nasty.
And why is it used?
Uh, it's it's little tiny wineries in the Midwest and some home wine makers that don't have the ability to sterile filter. Remember, I told you about integrity testable sterile filters? Uh, if you're really small, then you're not set up to do that.
Okay.
So uh, anyway, I one of my crusades is to teach my winemakers how to avoid this, and the simple way is just to get a mobile bottling line to come in that has all the equipment to do it right, and then you just don't
Got it.
even buy a bottling line.
Okay.
Uh,
Got it.
um,
Great.
okay, and then the other stabilizer uh, that is added to the wine and remains in the wine is to uh, prevent precipitation of potassium bitartrate crystals. This is cream of tartar. It's naturally in the wine, but it'll precipitate as crystals, and then you know the guy will go into Safeway and say, "Hey, they made my mother-in-law drink ground glass," but many consumers don't know what those crystals are, and they're afraid of them. So uh, to
Got it.
prevent that, we will normally chill the wine uh, to make them all drop out.
Okay.
But that's expensive, and not all small wineries have the ability to do that. They don't have refrigeration systems adequate to the task. And
Mhm.
besides, you're taking out potassium, and potassium tastes really good. So
Okay.
it's better to stabilize it where it is.
Okay.
So there's a couple of compounds. One of them is called carboxymethyl cellulose, or CMC. And that's
Okay.
what we've been using for the last 15 years or so. But it
Okay.
doesn't really work. It only works for about a year. So
Okay.
now there's a new one on the market that was just approved, and it's called potassium polyaspartame,
Okay.
uh, or KPA,
Okay.
and it goes under the name of oh golly, what do they call that stuff? Zenith,
Okay.
and that works like a charm.
Okay.
Uh, and so I'm advising a lot of my clients to use that instead of cold stabilizing.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And is that all of them?
That that addresses the list you gave me.
Okay. And what are your thoughts about? It seems like, and by the way, have all of these additives been used forever,
Well, no,
or
like
have
like
some
I
of
say,
them?
KPA, the last one I told you about, was only just recently
Right.
approved,
Right.
and
Okay. But
there's
are
an
there?
ongoing approval process with the
Sure.
federal government. They put them out for comments, and
But of a lot of them, of the ones you mentioned, which ones have been used the longest? I mean, yeast, obviously, I would think, but
yeah, yeast would be number one. Uh,
yeah.
Water. Um, SO2 is actually relatively recent. The Romans didn't
Okay.
use it. They had it. They used it for other things, but they didn't like what it did to wine.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I call my wines. I don't call them sulfite free. I call them Roman Reserve.
Okay. All
Uh,
right.
so that's about 500 years old.
Okay.
Uh,
Wait, what's 500 years old? The water and the
no,
yeast?
the use of sulfur dioxide.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Brandy's about 500 years old because we didn't know how to distill before that.
That's fine.
Uh, the addition of acids isn't. I mean, you needed to have chemical refineries to be able to use it. to
Okay.
use them. Mostly those are maybe 150 years old.
Okay. So pretty old. And then are all of them, I think you mentioned one that remained in the wine. Are they all, do they all end up leaving the wine by the time you drink the wine? Or are there some of them
No,
that stay in the wine?
the water stays, the brandy stays, the flavors from oak stay, the tannins stay, the SO2 stays, uh, the acids stay.
Okay.
Um, the copper stays, but like I say, it's in a minute amount and it's bound to sulfur.
Okay.
Uh, and the stabilizers,
Okay. Makes sense. And,
those
and
all stay in the wine.
okay. And then it sounds like there are no real health concerns for these, I would imagine, based on, your experience. That do people need to be worried about these? It seems like they've been used for 500 plus years or whatever, and that they're just here and they help make
I
the wine
I
better.
think there would be serious health concerns if they weren't allowed.
If they weren't
Yeah.
allowed, because
Well, like I was talking about biogenic amines. And more than that, we use these to make good wine. Mostly. I did want to talk about one other thing. Uh, in this discussion, there's a red grape concentrate called Mega Purple,
okay,
and it's a juice that is concentrated down. So it's about a threefold concentrate. It's about 67 bricks, 67% sugar, but it's made from a grape called Ruby Red. That's a Teinturier. It has color inside the, not just in the skins, in the flesh as well, and it's tons of color.
okay,
So you can add it because it's not an additive. It's a wine
oh okay,
or a grape juice.
oh okay,
But that doesn't mean it's a good idea. So this is
okay,
another example. See, because I don't like the way it smells. It kind of
okay,
smells sweaty to me. And
got it.
at a level, let's just say 0.5% or 1%, it adds color. So if you have a wine that is supposed to have more color than it has, you'll add mega purple. But
Okay,
and that's not an additive. It's
okay,
just a bad idea.
got it.
So I think that's
So
an example of where you should oppose this, not because it's a foreign additive, because it's not. You should oppose it
right,
because it just makes the wine taste funny.
okay. But I would imagine it sounds like, as you said, these additives, plain and simple, allow winemakers to make good wine, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Now
best way.
compare this to brewers, or how about just chefs in general?
Huh?
How how much do you think you could sell an article on additives in food? Like spices and
Right,
do you think anybody would care? I
right,
mean, you know, I I I don't want you to just put a raw carrot on my plate.
right,
Some people do, but not me.
right, right. That
And
makes sense.
and
Yeah.
so winemakers are more restricted than any other food preparation or beverage preparation. They're and I think to a first approximation, as I keep saying, there really aren't any additives
Hmm.
uh, that anybody should care about. And and
Okay.
more to the point, back to Bob Dylan.
Mhm.
you know, winemakers don't make very much money.
Mhm.
Uh, when I take on a new client that they're starting a new winery,
Mhm.
I tell them never become a winemaker or a jazz musician unless you have to,
Right.
because there's no money in it.
Right. Right.
It has to feed your soul. It has to be the thing that if you won the lottery, like if I won the lottery, I just give it all away. I
Mhm.
got the life I want already, and
Mhm.
I don't make very much money, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah. Right.
And you know, these people, these men and women, practice their passion to try to please their adherents. They're not crooks. They're not.
Mhm.
You know, this term manipulation has a slant on it of artful deceit, and that's just
Mhm.
not appropriate.
Right.
Um, so I think we ought to trust their artistic choices the way we have come to trust Dylan's.
Right.
You know,
Right.
consumers ought to honor wines that thrill and instruct and stop backseat driving and be open to why great winemakers use these techniques and tools. And they should talk to them. Because if you approach a
Yeah.
winemaker, especially these mom and pops, and you
Mhm.
just ask them, what about SO2? What about adding acid? What about using yeast, commercial yeast?
Right.
They'll love to talk to you about it. But
Yeah.
failing that, the natural wine movement is firing live ammo over their heads, and they're just going to say, "I do the minimum," which
Mm.
isn't really true.
Right. 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 Right.
And people
Yeah.
can tell they're lying, and that's created a bad marriage. You
Interesting.
know, like
Got
when the
it.
husband is looking at a pretty woman, you know, but he doesn't want to talk about it, right? Uh, and
Yeah.
you know, so I'm really in favor, and I hope you can help to heal the
Mhm.
bad marriage that currently exists by encouraging winemakers to tell the truth and encouraging consumers to have an open listening.
And open what? I'm
An
sorry.
open listening.
Oh, listen.
You know, like
Yeah.
when you go into a
Yeah.
marriage counselor, they sit you both down and they say, I
Yeah.
want you to have an open listening. I
Oh,
want you
yeah.
to
Right.
tell each other the
Right.
truth, and I want you to be okay with the truth.
Right. 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 Yeah. This has been super helpful. I've taken up way too much of your time already. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this together, and I'm sure I'm going to have questions along the way. I'll just shoot you an
Yeah,
email
I'm sure you
if there's anything.
will.
Yeah, I will. If there's anything I'm unclear about.
Yeah,
So
I hope I hope I didn't drag you through the mud more than you were hoping for.
no, it was really, really helpful. And you're my first conversation on this, so it was very
Ah,
helpful for all sorts of reasons. So yeah.
okay. Well, now
So thank
call
you
up
so much.
Alice Firing and see what she says.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot for your time, Claire.
Uh huh. Thank you.
All right.